every move. Who was she dating? Why was she dating that particular person? And everything else that concerned absolutely anything about her. On December 19th, 1979, Michelle had gone to a choir for an Avere celebration, and then on to the mall in her hometown of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, to buy a coat. At the mall, she bumped into a few of her friends from school, as well as Andy. Andy had allegedly gone to the mall to buy Michelle a Christmas present. To Andy, Michelle seemed very happy. Curtis Thomas, another boy who knew Michelle, saw her leave the mall just before closing time. "I remember her smile," he said, the goodbye smile. After leaving the mall, she walked to the family car, which she had left in a dark corner of the parking lot. She turned on the engine to warm it up and sat there for a minute. Then someone opened the door, pushed her over 29 times. One of the stabbings to her chest penetrated her aorta, and she bled to death in the car. When Michelle didn't arrive home that night, her family started to worry. Michelle's friend, Jane Hansen, remembered getting a call from Michelle's mother, Janet, who sounded frantic. 5 days before Christmas, at around 4 a.m. on the morning of December 20th, police found Michelle's body in the family car, which was still in the parking lot. She was lying on the passenger side floor. She had defensive wounds from fighting her attacker. She hadn't been sexually assaulted, and the cash she was carrying had not been taken. The attacker had been careful to hide his identity. He had worn rubber gloves, so he didn't leave fingerprints. A police spokesman said that everyone's instinct was to say that it was a guy, but they were not sure of the gender of the killer. Based on the number and location of stabbed wounds, police considered the killing to be personal in nature. At Michelle's funeral, Andy's behavior drew suspicion. Michelle's friend Gail Dawson remembered Andy being almost in the casket. Andy had his arms around her and he was just sobbing. He said to Gail that he had to know who she loved when she died. Did she love him, or did she love Mike? Andy was questioned by police, but his mother provided an alibi for him. She said he was home from the mall by the time Michelle was murdered. Many people, including Michelle's family and friends, expected Andy to be charged, but he never was charged. He left Cedar Rapids to join the Navy. In the week after Martinko's murder, more than 200 people responded to the detectives' appeals in the news for information concerning the case. Police interviewed numerous people, and several of them were cleared of suspicion through the use of polygraph. Rumors began to circulate about the crime. Some thought that Martinko had received harassing phone calls before her death, but police stated that they did not think so. On June 19th, 1980, police released a composite sketch developed based on descriptions provided by 2 witnesses. The description was of the man they believed stabbed Martinko. The sketch indicated a white man in his late teens or early 20s, weighing between 165 and 175 pounds and standing about 6 feet tall. Despite a sketch in hand, a description of the probable killer, and 200 responses, the authorities were still not able to charge anyone with the murder. All the suspects coming in were soon cleared off. There was no solid evidence for an arrest to be made. Died in the 1990s, believing that Andy had killed their daughter. In 2006, 27 years after Martinko's killing, a new cold case investigator working for the Cedar Rapids Police Department became the investigator of this case. He discovered what he believed to be the killer's blood while he was reviewing the case files. From that, police were able to build a partial DNA profile. The results of the test for partial DNA were entered into the Combined DNA Index System, the national DNA database, but no matches were found. Eventually, more than 125 people would have their DNA swabbed and compared against samples taken from the scene. Out of more than 80 potential suspects that had been identified over the years, more than 60 people were tested and eventually cleared of suspicion. A company specializing in DNA phenotyping was hired to create additional images of the killer, based solely on DNA clues about facial appearance and ancestry. The images looked considerably different from the 1980 composite sketch and showed a man with blonde hair and blue eyes. The company also produced approximations of how the man would have aged in the years since the crime. In a press conference during which the new image was shared, a former classmate of Martinko exclaimed that the face looked like another one of their classmates, but that classmate had been investigated and was cleared based on a DNA swab several years before. In 2018, The DNA phenotype and company took the data they had collected the year before entered it into GED Match, a public genealogy website that has been used by law enforcement to solve other cold cases. Most famously that of the Golden State Killer. GED Match returned one person who shared DNA markers with the suspect in Martinko's murder, and it determined them to be likely the killer's second cousin once removed. The company created a family tree starting with 4 sets of the woman's gria and reported that the killer was most likely descended from one of those couples. And with the Cedar Rapids Police Department contacted DNA-tested members of 2 of the branches of the family tree and eliminated those branches as containing the killer. He then contacted a member of a 3rd branch, and a DNA test determined that they were first cousins with the killer. That narrowed the suspects down to a set of 3 brothers who had grown up in Manchester, Iowa. The brothers were placed under surveillance, and investigators began to attempt to collect their DNA secretly. On October 29, 2018, an investigator observed one of the brothers, Jerry Lynn Burns, drink multiple sodas using a plastic straw. When Burns disposed of the straw, the investigator collected it and tested it for DNA. Tests eliminated the other 2 brothers as suspects, but the DNA from Burns matched the blood found on Martinko's clothing. On December 19, 2018, investigators went to Burns' business in Manchester, Iowa to interview him. He refused to voluntarily provide a sample of DNA, but was compelled to do so with a search warrant. His hands and arms were also examined for scars possibly left by the assumed cut sustained during the attack. Burns maintained that he did not know Martinko and was not there when she died. It's a homicide that happened at Westdale Mall. Michelle Martinko. Is that something you've ever heard of? Although an investigator later testified that Burns did not specifically deny killing Martinko, he was not able to provide an explanation for why his DNA would have been present at the crime scene. Burns showed almost no emotion during the interview, even when he was eventually told that he was being arrested. When asked if he had killed someone that night in 1979, Burns repeatedly told investigators to test his DNA. When the DNA sample was tested, it matched a blood sample found at the crime scene. On December 19, 2018, exactly 39 years after Martinko's murder, Burns was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He entered a plea of not guilty. His trial was originally scheduled for October 14, 2019. But in September, the defense requested a delay in order to gather more evidence and interview witnesses. The defense also requested the trial to be moved out to Lynn County. They did not resist either request, and the trial was rescheduled for February 10, 2020 in Scott County. The murder trial began on February 12, 2020. The prosecution emphasized the unlikelihood of the DNA evidence matching someone other than the person who left it at the scene. The doctor who performed Martinko's autopsy and investigators in the original case took the stand to testify to how investigation was conducted and to Martinko's cause of death. The defense argued that DNA evidence had been mishandled and that different articles of clothing from the scene should not have been stored together in one evidence bag. Prosecutors also played a video of a police interview of Burns, in which he denied being at the crime scene on the night of Martinko's murder and could not explain how his DNA had been found at the scene. They also played a later recording after Burns' arrest, in which Burns questioned whether he could have blocked out the memory of committing defense, brought only one witness, a self-described forensic DNA consultant, who testified on the possibility that police could have mishandled the evidence. He stated that Burns' DNA could have been at the scene due to secondary transfer, such as skin cells transferring to an article of clothing when someone brushes up against another person, although he clarified that it was not his opinion that this was the case with Burns' DNA. Prosecutors called a criminalist to contradict the defense's witness. The criminalist said that the storage of Martinko's clothing was not unusual. On February 24, 2020, after 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found Geraldine Burns guilty of first-degree murder of Michelle Martinko. Iowan law mandated a life sentence without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder. On May 29, 2020, Burns' attorney filed a motion asking for a new trial, claiming his constitutional and state rights were violated. and that the court made a mistake in overruling the request for evidence to be suppressed. Finally, on August 7th, 2020, was sentenced to life in prison without parole. In September 2020, Burns filed a notice of appeal. Burns is currently still imprisoned in the Anna Moses State Penitentiary. In a way, Michelle was there in that trial. She was there because she fought so hard and she struggled, and she fought so hard that she caused the killer to cut himself. And with that cut, he left his blood. And with that blood, he left his DNA, which solved the mystery. What do you guys think? Was it Michelle who finally helped the detectives to solve the case of her own murder? What are your thoughts about this case? Let us know in the comments section down. Was mid-February when the cold weather turned Michigan into a snowy paradise. 30-year-old Roxanne Laywood and her husband Terry Wood were enjoying their day at a bowling alley in Niles without realizing that their day would become a nightmare for both of them. After a while, when the thick and dense clouds started to scatter in the sky, Roxanne left the bowling alley and headed home first as they drove separately. It took 45 minutes for Terry to come back home for dinner. Terry entered his home and found Roxanne brutally murdered in their kitchen. For around 35 years, Terry was the suspect of great suspicion, but the case took a twist in 2021. What happened to Roxanne Laywood at her home in Barron County, Michigan? How was the decades-old cold case solved by students at Western Michigan University? Niles is one of a kind. There will be many family-friendly events downtown throughout the year. The city makes an effort by hosting several festivals as well. People enjoyed living there and celebrating these events. But unfortunately, the chances of becoming a victim of crime in Niles are high. Compared to Michigan, Niles has a crime rate that is higher than 95% of the state cities and towns of all sizes. Based on FBI crime data, Niles is not one of the safest communities in America. It is the town where Rox and Wood turned into a victim. Her husband Terry was put under a cloud of suspicion. It was April 15th, 1956, when Dale Woods of Niles and Patricia Chadwell of South Bend were blessed with a beautiful baby girl in Niles. They named her Roxanne Lee Wood. Roxanne Wood, lovably known as Rock, to those in her circle grew up in Niles with her siblings Janet, Jerry, Bruce, and Rick Woods. Roxanne was a member of Niles Junior Achievement. She graduated from Niles High School in 1974. And then worked in a customer service role for Automated Molded Plastics Company across the state line in South Bend, Indiana. Years passed and Roxanne got married eventually. She married Terry Wood, and the couple's relationship seemed perfect. Roxanne enjoyed cooking, baking, and sharing their family recipes with friends. She also started growing rose bushes around their place because she was very fond of flowers, rose bushes. Everything went smoothly for the couple until 1987. On a snowy day in February, Roxanne and Terry spent a happy day at the bowling alley to celebrate her 31st birthday. After a while, when the thick and dense clouds began to scatter in the sky, Roxanne left the bowling alley. She headed home first since they both drove separately. Terry told her that he would be coming back in some time, so Roxanne thought of preparing dinner for both. It took 45 minutes for Terry to go back home for dinner. He never expected that the night would haunt him for the rest of his life. When Terry entered his home, he saw his beloved Roxanne lying in a pool of blood with her throat slashed. Terry felt wholly broken and devastated to see Roxanne in that condition, and he immediately reported the murder to the officials. He was mourning in confusion about the mysterious murder. Finally, the police and investigators reached the crime scene. Terry told the officers that Roxanne had left home early from the bowling alley and told them about the entire scenario of what happened that day. The police initially suspected Terry, but they found that a back utility door had been forcibly entered. They also noticed a blood drop spilled on the floor that didn't belong to Terry, so the officials believed that some mysterious murderer was roaming outside. The droplet of blood on the door and the results of a sexual assault kit were entered into the state's combined DNA index system. But unfortunately, no matches were found, and they couldn't get enough evidence that could produce any leads. Since it was a time when forensic technology was in its infancy with a lack of proper evidence, nobody could stop the case from growing cold. Cold cases are still a nightmare for most law enforcers, yet people trust their officials to bring closure to the family. But in Roxanne's case, for 35 years, her killer remained elusive, and Terry was living under a massive cloud of suspicion. However, the officials were striving hard to bring answers to Roxanne's mysterious murder. So the Michigan State Police reopened the investigation in 2000, but were unsuccessful in finding her killer. The police never gave up. They reopened the case in 2020, but this time the Michigan State Police decided to take a new approach. Detective First Lieutenant Chuck Christensen and Western Michigan University students under the program director, Dr. Ashlyn Kirsten, teamed up in a new partnership to solve Roxanne's case, which was the first case for Western Michigan University students. It was also a part of the school's cold case program, where students provided a fresh set of eyes to review hundreds of files and evidence. Michigan State Police provided Western Michigan University student team with their case files. First, student investigators took those boxes of loose paper files and organized them chronologically into binders spanning over 3,000 pages. Next, the students scanned the massive case file and converted it into a searchable digital format. The digital file was game-changing for detectives. They made it searchable and portable, so sifting through the available information was far more practical. Estimated that the doctoral students Ashley Klebeck and Carl Huber put in 1,200 hours of work over 8 months on Wood's suit, organizing several boxes of files that had been amassed during the investigation. In addition, students at Western Michigan University reportedly cataloged the 3,000-page case working alongside investigators to solve the mystery. Student investigators also read through Roxanne's file in total, familiarizing themselves with the details of the case. They also took their extensive notes and did a follow-up research via internet sources. Even meetings with detectives were done for student investigators to bring up any questions or inconsistencies and for the group to discuss the case. MSP also enlisted the help of Identifinders International, Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick's California-based genetic genealogy company. They found that the perpetrator had left DNA evidence at Roxanne's mysterious murder scene, but the sample was degraded. Then, in what would turn out to be a landmark case, Identifinders successfully tested the sample using the lowest amount of DNA to date and found a possible family connection. A genealogist named Gabriela Vargas finally gave Michigan State Police the name of a possible suspect. The police immediately collected a cigarette, but the defendant had discarded. Gabriela confirmed that the person who left his DNA at Roxanne's murder scene was 67-year-old Patrick Wayne Gillum. For around 35 years, Terry was the suspect of great suspicion. But the case took a twist in 2021 when they matched the DNA samples with Patrick. After Patrick was identified as a suspect, undercover units surveilled him extensively, and he was interviewed on 2 separate occasions. Patrick was first interviewed by the Michigan State Police at the South Bend Police Department on July 29, 2021. He denied ever going to Michigan except for work in 1987, which was when he was on parole in Indiana. During the second time, Patrick denied knowing the street where Wood's family lived or knowing Roxanne Wood when shown pictures of her. But when Detective Bailey informed Patrick that the woman in the picture had been assaulted, Patrick began to breathe rapidly and his hands shook as he held them up. At that time, Patrick said he needed to talk to a lawyer and the interview ended. Patrick was arrested for Roxanne Wood's murder on the 17th of February, 2022, almost 35 years from the day of Roxanne's murder. Investigators did not divulge many details following the arrest of Patrick in February. Police then said that new technology helped link Patrick to the crime. After pleading no contest to second-degree murder, Patrick was sentenced on the 25th of April, 2022, to a minimum of 23 years in prison. He was also charged with breaking and entering an occupied dwelling. Forcefully breaking into an occupied space carries a maximum penalty of 15 years in prison. Meanwhile, the officials also found that Patrick had previously committed a similar crime but did not murder her. The victim survived the attack and was the primary witness against him, and Patrick was incarcerated for that crime. However, he had been released early, just 6 months after he murdered Roxanne. The identification of Patrick not only brought Roxanne's killer to justice, but it cleared Terry Wood's name after 35 years of suspicion. In Roxanne's case, telling the world what happened to her took 3 decades. Thanks to the recent and ongoing advancements in DNA technology and investigative tactics done by a genealogist named Gabriela Vargas and Western Michigan University students under Dr. Ashlyn Kirsten, who spent their valuable time to bring closure to the case and peace to the victim's family. Mysterious Hook offers our thoughts and prayers to Roxanne's family and our tremendous respect and support for Western Michigan University students and the team who helped crack a decades-old cold case. What are your thoughts about this case? Let us know in the comment section down below.